Hey everybody, KC0BI Tom. It's Tuesday morning here in St. Ansgar, kind of gloomy right now. The sun's trying to come out. I had to take the day off. I got to run over to see my accountant, start working on last year's taxes, make a little better plan for next year's taxes. It's going to be a rough morning. As a lot of you know, with the passing of TLJ shutting down her business, stuff like that, retiring and pulling my pension, it's going to be a rough day on me. But word of advice to everybody out there: when you are running a small business, even your home life, make sure you document all your bills and all your expenditures and income. Make sure somebody knows where that information is. Don't keep it in your head like TLJ did. So the last couple of weeks, about 3 weeks now, I've been working on the weekends is gathering this information out of the bank account, going through her computer, checking her paper file drawer, and I think I got stuff covered. We'll find out today. Do a better job out there. It makes the life for everybody else a little easier. When I would be working on these on the weekends, I would have to take a little break to kind of free up my mind and keep my level of sand going. What I would do is I'd just do a quick, take a 5-minute break and do a quick search on the internet for like strange IT stories or strange tech stories. I can relate to the IT ones. It's kind of interesting, some of the tech stories that are coming out there. The Chinese weather balloons, yeah. One story that caught my attention, I started checking on, searching that type of story. There was a lot more in the last couple of years. I think the first one I read was on CNET, and the other ones were coming off Reddit, a few other tech stories, and quite interesting. There was an increase in viewers or listeners on AM broadcast stations, and this is coming from young adults. Kids are getting out of high school or I've been out of college for a few years, that little age group, which I thought was quite interesting. These are the kids that have, or young adults, I should say, they're younger than me, so they're kids, have their music digitally, either on some type of MP3 player or on their phone, or their digital assistant, either on their phone or on the tabletop. If they want to listen to something, they will say, "Hey lady, play me Lady Gaga," or "Play me whatever," and it plays it till they're sick of it. But listening to AM stations, I thought was quite interesting. I work at North Iowa Area Community College, NIAC for short. My office area is next to our IST, Information System Technology. For these are the young kiddies that are going into the IT world. Don't know why. This used to be a full head of hair, guys. And I started noticing, pay a little attention to the kids when they're coming and going out of class. And yeah, sure enough, there was one kid out in the hallway one day with a little 9-volt transistorized radio showing his students and his fellow classmates actually trying to dial up and down the band, and he was quite, was kind of puzzled that he couldn't pick up the station he'd been listening to outside. I walked over and first thing I says, "Where did you find that?" And it was in his dad's garage. He, found it on the shelf and put a battery in. I was surprised of the AM, the radio stations out there you never heard of, Then I explained to him, inside a building, AM stations don't work too good. They work better when you're outside or if you have an external antenna. And it was like that deer in the headlight look. He didn't understand it. So I had to explain to him that AM radio stands for amplitude modulation, which means the transmitter puts out a carrier like this. If it's quiet, nobody's talking or playing music, it's steady. As soon as you start talking or playing that record, the signal level goes up and down. And they thought that was cool. And I said, then you have a thunderstorm go by and the whole floor goes up and down. And we'll talk a little later about how you could use that information. AM radio stations, the band spread from, check my cheat sheet here, 540 kilohertz up to 1,600 kilohertz was laid down by the government back in the mid-20s. AM was before that, experimental stations, but the government realized that this would be a way we could serve the population of the country. So they set up this section of the broadcast band for AM. It's a low signal. It travels kind of weird. There are two types of signal that comes off your AM transmitter. One we call a ground wave. It just follows the surface of the earth. It'll go up 30, 50 miles before it dissipates. The other way is what we call a sky wave. This will travel straight off in the transmitter as the earth curves around, because the earth is round, not flat. It hits the ionosphere. During the daytime, the ionosphere will absorb some of the signal and reflect the rest of it. So those signals will go out 50 to 100 miles out. At night, the ionosphere changes. It kind of collapses a little bit because it's not being charged by the sun energy. So now there's less signal being absorbed by the ionosphere and more is being reflected. So now you get signals that travel a lot further out. How far out? It can be quite far. Say we have an AM station here in St. Ansgar and a station up in Duluth, Minnesota, which is roughly 250 miles away as the crow flies. We're operating on the same frequency and the same power level. During the daytime, we don't interfere with each other, but at night, since we're reflecting more signal off the ionosphere, my signal can actually get up there in downtown Duluth, and same with their signal get down here in downtown St. Ansgar, which could be a problem. So from sunset to sunrise, the government has stations either A, reduce their power, B, change their pattern, or C, sign off completely. I mean, that's pretty hard to make a living when you're not allowed to run at night. And usually as the larger station got the priority, or the first one with the license got priority for that area, because again, we're supposed to be serving the public. FM radio came along a little bit later in the mid-60s and being used. FM is a higher frequency. It's FM modulation, which means when your transmitter is putting out the signal, it's steady. As you're talking or playing the music, it goes back and forth. You get a thunderstorm come by and the lightning strikes, the noise goes up and down, but the radio is not listening for that up and down motion. It's looking for that left to right motion. That's why FM is static free. FM stations, there's roughly 100 channels of that, and there's over 15,000 licensed radio stations in the country right now for FM. These signals go up anywhere again from 50 to 100 miles. That's why we were allowed to reuse those channels, frequency allocations throughout the country. Getting back to AM, back in the late 20s, early 30s, the government started realizing and noticing that the same entity was either starting radio stations or buying stations up, and they didn't want to hurt the growth of AM radio, and they weren't sure if they had the authority to do it. So they came out with what was known as clear channel stations. These were 50,000 watt stations that could be heard over most of the country when they operated. Right now there's roughly 60 of them, and across the country. You know, when I was growing up in the early 70s and mid 70s, Saturday night down the North Main parking lot in Austin, the car that had the biggest crowd around it wasn't the street rod cool looking car. It was a car that had a good AM radio in it to pick up WLS, listen to Larry Lujak, or Dave Winger down at Omaha, or out in Denver, KOA. At night, those signals would really travel, and being a clear channel station, a lot of times you pick them up during the daytime. Competition between other AM stations and even your FM brothers was hard, and now with on-demand music from your personal assistants and from your phones, it's pretty hard to make a living in AM, especially AM. A lot of these stations are switching over. They'll have an HD translator, digital translator, to cover their town. And there are some that are just going dark. They realize they can't make ends meet, so they just power down, and that's it. The station goes away. AM and FM radio stations have different power levels they can operate on, depending on their license, anywhere from as low as 250 watts for AM stations up to 5,000 or 10,000 watts for most AM stations. Then there are the 50,000 watt clear channel stations. FM stations, they operate anywhere from 250 watts up to 100,000 watts, depending on their license and their coverage area. One nice thing about AM, kind of neat if you're a storm spotter, not a chaser, storm spotter like me. I'm sitting here in St. Ansgar, Iowa. To the southwest of us is Mason City. Radio station there is 1300 KGLO. Up in Albert Lee, you got Kate, KATE radio. They're at 1450. And north of me is Austin, and you have KQAQ 970. When we have a thunderstorm rolling through, and that thunderstorm is on the other side of that transmitter for me, when you get a lightning hit and the noise, you hear that static burst. If it's beyond this radio, the transmitter location, I can still hear some of the information on the radio station. If that thunderstorm is between me and that transmitter, that information is gone. You just hear the static. So it's kind of a neat thing to do when you're out there chasing storm or spotting storms, is to you think you know where the storm is by dialing up to different radio stations in that area. You can kind of help. You're not going to get an exact location, but it gives you an idea what's going on. FM and AM stations were usually co-located. They're owned by the same entity. Going on there in the 60s, the government started noticing a lot of stations were being owned in the market by one person, and it could be an AM and FM station, and then TV was coming on, so a lot of times that entity would spin off a TV station, and that was starting to worry the government again, because now you had one entity putting in or controlling the news source. In the 70s, they realized they had the authority to do it, and they tried it, and they were able to. In Austin, KOS AM, FM, and TV was split up. The TV was pushed off on its own. The AM, FM were allowed to continue as one entity due to the fact that the FM station was fairly new. They probably wanted to survive on its own. Down in Mason City, you had KGLO, which stood for the Globe Gazette. It was a local newspaper, and they also own the AM and FM and the channel TV station. All those were split up. The AM FM went off on their own, the TV station went off on their own, and the newspaper went off on their own. And they did this throughout the country in the 70s to, again, make sure that information is being coming out and not being censored. Markets are set up by population. You have, here where I'm at, the population is quite low, so our market's quite wide. Then you get up, say, New York City area, where that market area number, that's market number one. That's kind of a smaller market, but there's more population density higher. Entities are allowed to only own so many radio, TV stations in a market, but they found ways around it, and the government's trying to work on to close these loopholes. I could spin up an LLC in my name, own the maximum number of radio, TV stations, and spin up another LLC and have it in my dog's name. But actually, I run it, but on paper, the dog owns it. And it's not that bad, but there are, stuff like that's going on, and they're starting to see that and cracking down on it. So, when you're out there listening to your AM stations, remember, at night they travel further, so on a nice warm sunny evening, go out there, get a blanket, sit down on the grass, dial up and down the band, listen to what's out there. You get tired of that, go find a used shortwave radio at a pawn shop, or buy one offline. They are quite interesting when you get in the shortwave market, and maybe they'll actually get you into ham. Because as a ham radio operator, when you get in the AM band and the HF frequency area, it's a lot of fun. Especially right now, we're getting solar cycle 25 is popping up. Signals are booming all over the place, and it's a lot of fun to talk to people on the other side of the world. Word of caution: if you really think this is fun, being on the radio, it is, and it's hard to get into business because, like I said, the competition is pretty good. Do not try to start your own radio station unless you have a lot of capital and have a good lawyer and go legally do it. Don't go online and find these Chinese radio station in a box, that I call them. I mean, they're out there. They put out a couple of watts, but they are extremely illegal. The FCC right now is on a crusade of tracking down these pirate radio stations, and people are getting fined. Equipment's being being picked up, taken away. You can be fined up to over $2 million for running a pirate radio station. Just remember that. That's not chump change. That's big time money, and they want to make sure that you're not going to be interfering with the people that have the license for that frequency, causing them financial harm. So on that, 7-3 everybody, I'm going off to see the accountant, and somebody want to make me a cake with a file in it? Be sure to tell your friends, neighbors, other hams. Subscribe, hit that bell to get notification when new videos come out. Add comments below. 7-3 everybody. Okay. Really?